I slid into the backseat of the rideshare, feeling like my entire day had been stacked on my shoulders. You know that bone-deep exhaustion that settles behind your eyes and makes everything blur a little? That was me. I loosened my scarf, opened my emails, and tried to convince myself the evening would be quiet and predictable. Outside, the city lights smudged across the window like soft brushstrokes. For a moment, I let myself drift, thinking about dinner, bills, and the comfort of slipping back into my routine. It was supposed to be just one more ordinary ride home. The driver had that gentle, fatherly voice that made you feel like you could exhale without fear of being judged. When he glanced at me in the mirror and asked, "Long day, ma'am?" I gave him a tired smile, the kind that answers more truthfully than words ever could. I'm not usually one to chat in cars, but something about him felt oddly grounding, like he carried quiet wisdom in the lines of his face. For a few minutes, it was nice to just exist without having to perform, explain, or pretend. But everything shifted the moment we turned onto my street. It was subtle, like the air held its breath before something breaks. He looked around as if recognizing a familiar scene, and then said it casually, almost kindly. "Funny, I know this street. I drive your husband here all the time." My heart jolted. I sat up straighter. "My husband, Daniel Turner?" I asked, barely breathing. And when he nodded, telling me he dropped Daniel at a young woman's house every week, something inside me cracked so quietly I wasn't sure he heard it. But I felt it. Every word hit like a cold wave I wasn't ready for. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight, as if the air itself had become thick and uncooperative. "A young woman?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound casual, even though a sting was already spreading across my chest. The driver nodded, describing her like he was mentioning the weather. Red hair, apartment 204, a sweet girl. Sweet. The word scraped against something raw in me. I sat there nodding politely, while inside everything tilted. You know that moment when your reality suddenly feels out of place, like you've stepped into someone else's life? That's exactly where I was. I managed a smile, one of those fragile ones women learn to master when the world expects grace instead of honesty. "Yes, of course," I said, as if the information meant nothing more than a misplaced package. But my fingers trembled against my purse, and my heartbeat was frantic, like it was trying to outrun the truth. While the driver focused on the road, my mind spun backward through every late night, every tired excuse, every weekend he claimed he needed just a bit of space. Suddenly, they weren't harmless moments anymore. They felt like clues I never realized I'd been collecting. When the car stopped in front of my house, the world looked the same, but nothing felt the same. I stepped out slowly, like my legs belonged to someone else. The porch light glowed warmly, the way it always did, but I felt cold underneath my coat. "Thank you," I told the driver, though gratitude was the last thing playing in my mind. As he drove away, I stood there in the quiet, hugging myself against the evening air. Apartment 204. A red-haired woman. Daniel's weekly destination. Those pieces settled into me like sharp, unwelcome truths, and I already knew I wouldn't be able to ignore them. As I unlocked the front door, my hands were steady, but only because my mind had slipped into that strange, protective numbness women develop when the truth hits too hard. The house smelled like lavender detergent, the same scent I'd chosen years ago because Daniel said it made home feel peaceful. I stood in the hallway, staring at the framed photos on the wall. Vacations, anniversaries, little pockets of laughter frozen in time. Each one suddenly felt like a lie wearing a smile. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, anchoring myself before the panic could swallow me whole. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, though my mouth was too dry to drink it. My thoughts kept circling the same questions, sharp and relentless. Who was she? Why her? How long had I been living beside a secret dressed as a husband? I leaned against the counter, feeling the cool surface press into my spine, grounding me just enough. Every memory of Daniel clicked into place differently now. His sudden gym nights, his extra work errands, the way he'd been distracted even when he smiled. The truth had been hiding in plain sight, and I had been too trusting to see it. When I finally made it to the bedroom, The silence felt heavier than the dark. I sat on the edge of the bed, my pulse loud in my ears, the driver's words replaying with painful clarity. Apartment 204. A red-haired woman. Weekly visits. I pressed my palms together tightly, as if holding myself would keep me from shattering. But beneath the shock, beneath the hurt, something else began to flicker. An instinct, a quiet pull toward truth. I didn't know every detail yet, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't let this stay in the shadows. Not anymore. When I walked through the door that evening, Daniel greeted me like nothing in the world was out of place. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, kissing my cheek, the warmth of his skin brushing mine as if he still belonged there. I forced a smile, steadying my breath so he wouldn't feel the tremor hiding underneath. He smelled like his usual cologne, cedar and spice, but now it felt foreign, like a scent borrowed from another life. "You're late. Everything okay?" he asked casually, completely unaware that my reality had shifted on its axis just hours before. "Traffic," I replied, keeping my voice soft. "Nothing new." During dinner, I watched him the way someone studies a stranger they're trying to understand. The clink of silverware, the hum of the refrigerator, even the low glow of the pendant light above us. All of it felt painfully normal, which somehow made the betrayal feel sharper. I asked, "So, anything unusual this week?" pretending to reach for my napkin while really reaching for clues in his expression. He shrugged, eyes relaxed, posture loose. "Same old. Work, gym, home." "Why?" he said without hesitation. I held his gaze for a second too long before smiling tightly. "Just curious," I answered, tasting the bitterness beneath the words. Inside, though, I was unraveling. Every casual movement he made felt loaded with hidden meaning. Every laugh, every sip of water, every story he told with easy confidence. I excused myself briefly and stepped into the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. I checked his ride receipts again. Nothing. Not a single trip to that street. He must have paid in cash or maybe used another app. Apartment 204 burned in my mind like a neon sign I couldn't shut off. I knew I wouldn't sleep until I understood exactly what he'd been doing. And with whom. I tried to focus on clearing the dishes, letting the warm water run over my hands as if it could wash away the panic clinging to my ribs. Daniel hummed softly in the other room, flipping through channels the way he always did after dinner. The sound used to feel comforting, ordinary, even domestic. But tonight, each idle hum felt tainted, like a thread pulling apart the fabric of our life. I dried my hands slowly, stalling, studying the familiar kitchen that suddenly felt like a stranger's home. My heart kept beating too fast, urging me toward answers I wasn't ready for but couldn't ignore. When I walked back into the living room, he glanced at me with that same easy, unbothered expression. It was surreal watching him sit there, legs stretched out, completely unaware that I knew more than he ever intended to share. "You seem quiet tonight," he said, not looking away from the TV. I forced a soft laugh and sat beside him, careful to keep a cushion of space between us. "Just tired," I said, though the truth was building like a storm inside my chest. I studied the way he held the remote, the same hand that had knocked on another woman's door. The thought made my stomach twist. Later, while he showered, I stood by our bedroom window and stared at the street below. The night breeze slipped through the small opening, cooling the back of my neck while my mind replayed the driver's voice on a loop. Apartment 204. Red hair. Weekly visits. I pressed my forehead lightly against the glass, grounding myself in the cold. I knew I couldn't confront him yet. Not without the truth laid out in front of me, undeniable and complete. So I made a quiet promise to myself right then. Whatever it took, I was going to uncover everything he thought he'd hidden. When Daniel finally fell asleep beside me, the room felt heavier than the dark around us. His breathing was steady, peaceful even, and for a moment I just watched him, trying to understand how someone could look so familiar and feel like a stranger at the same time. The glow from the street lamp outside slipped through the blinds, casting thin lines of light across the sheets. I traced those lines with my eyes, grounding myself in the quiet while my mind spun with questions. Every inhale he took reminded me of all the things he hadn't told me. It hurt more than I expected. I slid out of bed carefully, feeling the floor cool beneath my feet as I crossed the room. Standing in the doorway, I watched him for one silent moment. Not the man I married, not the partner I loved, just a man sleeping under the roof he was slowly, quietly breaking. My chest tightened with a mix of heartbreak and clarity. I opened the hallway closet and pulled out my old notebook, the one I used years ago when life felt uncertain and I needed a place to gather my thoughts. Tonight, it felt like armor. I flipped to a blank page, my pen shaking slightly as it touched the paper. I wrote down everything: the driver's words, the address, the red-haired woman, the way Daniel lied without hesitation. Seeing the truth in ink made it real in a way my mind hadn't fully accepted yet. Closing the notebook, I held it against my chest, inhaling deeply until my heartbeat steadied. I didn't have all the answers, but I had a direction, and I knew that the next step wouldn't be taken with emotion alone. It would be taken with purpose. Whatever Daniel had been hiding, I was done leaving it in the dark. The next week, I left work early with a calmness that didn't feel like mine. It was the kind of calm that comes right before a storm, steady on the outside, trembling underneath. I opened the Find My Phone app, feeling a strange mix of guilt and liberation as Daniel's location popped up instantly. He'd always assumed I never used the feature, never bothered with it. Tonight, that ignorance worked in my favor. I grabbed my keys, my pulse quickening with every breath. I didn't know exactly what I'd find, but I was ready to face what he'd tried so hard to hide. I followed his little blue dot across the city, each turn of the wheel tightening something inside me. Traffic lights felt longer, the air warmer, the city louder, every sense sharper, as if my body already knew the truth before my mind caught up. When he finally stopped moving, my stomach dropped. It was the same building the driver had mentioned, the same street, the same heavy truth waiting behind its walls. I parked a few spaces down, angling my car behind a large van to stay hidden. My hands rested on the steering wheel, shaking despite how hard I tried to steady them. I watched Daniel step out of his car, adjusting his jacket like a man preparing for something familiar, something routine. That hurt more than I expected. He walked confidently toward the building, and I slipped out of my car quietly, staying far enough behind him to go unnoticed. My heart pounded so loudly, I worried it might echo in the empty parking lot. I crouched behind another vehicle when he reached the second-floor landing, and then it happened. He knocked softly on the door of apartment 204. The one place I wasn't supposed to know existed. The door opened, and she was real. She had red hair, vivid, unmistakable, catching the hallway light like something meant to be noticed. She opened the door with a smile so warm it almost stunned me. Not because of who she was, but because of what Daniel did next. He stepped toward her with a familiarity that punched the air out of my lungs. She wrapped her arms around him, melting into him like they'd done it 1,000 times. And then he kissed her. Soft, certain. The kind of kiss that belongs to two people who don't feel the weight of consequences. I felt something inside me collapse quietly, almost gracefully, like a tree falling in slow motion. For a moment, I just stared, frozen behind the parked car, my fingers digging into the metal as if it could anchor me. Everything around me blurred, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, even the warmth of the evening air. It all faded behind the roaring in my ears. Watching your husband touch someone else is a pain you don't prepare for, not even in your darkest thoughts. It's a heartbreak that doesn't scream, it suffocates. I pressed my hand to my chest as if I could hold the cracked pieces together long enough to stay upright. But then something shifted. The pain didn't disappear, but it transformed, turning cold, sharp, precise. My breathing steadied, my vision sharpened, and the shock began to harden into resolve. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling but determined. I zoomed in, capturing every angle, every embrace, every lie made visible. Photo after photo, proof after proof, evidence he could never talk his way out of. As I watched them together, laughing, holding each other close, I whispered to myself, "You really thought I'd never find out." I stayed hidden long after their door closed, long after their laughter faded into the walls. The night air felt heavier around me, thick with the kind of silence that follows a truth you can't unsee. I leaned back against the cold metal of the car behind me, feeling the chill seep through my clothes while my chest burned hot. It was such a strange contrast, my body cold, my emotions blistering. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the pain wash over me like a wave. I finally stopped fighting. And once it passed, I felt something I hadn't expected. Clarity. When I finally pushed myself to stand, the world looked sharper than before. The streetlight flickered above me, casting long shadows that stretched across the pavement like fractured pieces of the life I thought I had. I looked at Daniel's car, parked so confidently, as if it belonged there, as if he belonged there. My jaw tightened. I walked slowly back toward my own car, each step grounding me more firmly in the truth. Betrayal didn't just break something, it awakened something. Something fierce, something steady, something done being naive. Inside my car, I opened the gallery and scrolled through every photo I'd taken. Image after image, proof after proof, the story of his lies laid out in vivid detail. My hands shook, not from heartbreak anymore, but from the power of knowing exactly what I held. I whispered to myself, barely louder than my breath, "You lied to my face. For months. You have no idea what's coming." Hearing my own voice like that, calm, controlled, certain, sent a strange, steadying warmth through me. I put the phone down, straightened my posture, and started the engine. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of truth. I waited for Daniel on the couch that night, sitting in the kind of stillness that feels almost unnatural. The living room was dim, lit only by a single lamp, casting warm shadows across the walls. I could hear the soft ticking of the clock, every second echoing louder than the last. My body was calm, eerily calm, but my mind stood sharp as glass. I kept the photos tucked inside my robe pocket like a truth pulsing against my side. When I finally heard his keys at the door, a chill ran up my spine, steadying me even more. He walked in with a smile, casual and confident, like a man returning from an ordinary day. "Sophie?" he called out, surprised to see me awake. "You're home early." I studied him closely, the way he loosened his tie, the relaxed lift of his brows, the softness in his voice. Everything about him radiated the comfort of someone living a double life too easily. "Not as early as you were," I said slowly. "At apartment 204. The word slipped from my mouth like a cold blade, controlled and precise. And in the split second before he reacted, I saw guilt flicker through his eyes. He froze. Completely. As if his lungs forgot how to function. His bag slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of the lie. He wouldn't look me in the eyes now, his gaze darting around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. I leaned back against the couch cushion, feeling the firmness press against my spine, grounding me in the moment. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing the edges of the photos. "Really?" I whispered, lifting them slightly, because she seemed very comfortable kissing my husband. The moment the photos hit the coffee table, Daniel's entire body seemed to collapse inward. His knees buckled before he even realized he was falling, and he dropped to the floor like a man watching his world crumble in slow motion. "Sophie, please," he choked out, reaching for the pictures with trembling fingers. His face was pale, his eyes wide and glossy with panic. But I just watched him, detached in a way that surprised even me. I wasn't numb. I was awake. More awake than I'd been in months. And seeing him fall apart didn't bring me pity. It brought me clarity. He gathered the photos in his hands, flipping through them as if hoping they'd magically turn into something innocent. "It's not serious," he cried, tears already streaming down his face. "I was stupid. I'll stop. I'll fix everything." His voice cracked, desperate, frantic. He crawled closer, reaching for the hem of my robe like a child begging not to be abandoned. But the sight didn't soften me. It sharpened something inside me. I pulled my leg back slowly, refusing the touch. His betrayal had been rehearsed for months. Mine? It was unfolding right in front of him, carved into every calm breath I took. "You want to fix something you destroyed one secret trip at a time?" I asked, my voice low but steady, each word hitting him harder than the last. He lowered his head, shoulders shaking, his hands covering his face like he couldn't bear the weight of what he'd done. For years, I'd been the one to soothe, to forgive, to find excuses for his quiet selfishness. Not tonight. Tonight, he could drown in the consequences he created. I stood up slowly, feeling the room shift around me, feeling my own strength settle deeper. "You're going to regret every single ride you took to her house," I said softly, not out of spite, but out of truth. I walked past him slowly, feeling his desperation cling to the air like humidity after a storm. He stayed on his knees, shoulders shaking, mumbling apologies that sounded more like panic than remorse. I could feel his gaze on my back as I moved toward the window, the soft glow from the streetlight slipping across the floor. My reflection in the glass didn't look broken. It looked steady, almost unfamiliar in its strength. I pressed my fingertips lightly against the cool surface, grounding myself in the moment. He'd spent months choosing lies. Tonight, I finally chose myself. Behind me, I heard him scramble to his feet, his breathing loud and uneven. "Sophie, please, talk to me. Look at me," he begged, his voice raw. I turned slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. What I saw wasn't love. It was fear. Fear of losing comfort, stability, a wife he assumed would always forgive. His tears fell faster when he realized I wasn't moved, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of his emotions. I wasn't afraid of losing him. I was afraid of who I'd become if I stayed. That thought hit me harder than any betrayal ever could. He reached out again, hesitant, trembling, but I stepped back, creating a distance that felt like reclaiming oxygen after being underwater too long. "Don't," I said quietly, and my voice carried a calmness that made him freeze. I watched him swallow hard, his chest rising and falling in quick, sharp breaths. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and he knew it. I let a long silence settle between us, the kind that forces truth into the open. Then, without raising my voice, without breaking my steady expression, I said, "You chose her every week. Now you get to live with the consequences." The next morning, I woke with a clarity that felt almost physical, like someone had opened a window inside my chest and let fresh air in. Daniel was already gone, moving through the house with the skittish energy of a guilty man who doesn't know what comes next. I didn't rush. I showered, dressed, and made myself coffee, each step deliberate, precise. The quiet of the kitchen didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt intentional. I sat at the table, opened my notebook, and reviewed every photo, every timestamp, every detail. Each piece of evidence felt like reclaiming a piece of myself he had chipped away. By mid-morning, I was sitting across from my lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of justice. I laid the photos in front of her one by one as she nodded slowly, already assessing the legal landscape. "Your prenup is airtight," she said, tapping the infidelity clause with her pen. "With this evidence, you'll walk away with almost everything." Hearing those words didn't bring joy. It brought relief, a quiet, dignified kind. I wasn't taking revenge out of spite. I was taking back what I had built, what I had earned, what he had taken for granted. I leaned back in the chair, crossing my legs, feeling strength settle deeper in my spine. "Good," I told her, my voice steady. "Let him keep his red-haired hobby. I'll keep the life he tried to ruin." My lawyer gave me a look, half admiration, half understanding. She started drafting the paperwork immediately, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Watching her work felt like watching the universe shift in my favor, piece by piece. And as I signed the preliminary documents, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. When I got home that evening, the house felt strangely lighter. as if it already knew it wouldn't belong to him much longer. I placed the printed papers neatly on the dining table, unsigned by him, already validated by me. A quiet sense of justice settled over the room, mixing with the familiar scent of eucalyptus from the candles I'd lit earlier. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders didn't feel like they were carrying someone else's sins. I walked toward the hallway, paused, and glanced back at the table. His name on paper, his lies finally documented. It felt like closure waiting to happen. A few minutes later, I heard his car door slam, followed by footsteps that sounded too fast, too frantic. He walked in and froze when he saw the bags I'd packed for him neatly placed by the entrance, his clothes, his toiletries, his things that no longer had a place in my life. His face drained of color, his jaw trembling as he looked from the bags to me. "Sophie, what is this?" he whispered, though he already knew. I stepped closer, not with anger, but with a clarity that made him swallow hard. "Your new reality," I said quietly. "The one you chose." He rushed toward the table, grabbing the divorce papers with shaking hands. "Please, don't do this," he pleaded, his voice cracking like thin glass. I watched him, not with cruelty, but with the kind of calm reserved for truths that cannot be undone. "You already did," I replied, my tone steady and final. He reached for me again, his fingers barely brushing the air between us, but I stepped back. The distance wasn't just physical. It was everything he'd created, one secret trip at a time. "You can go to apartment 204, I said softly. "It's the only home you have left now." Daniel stood there, holding the papers, breathing like the walls were closing in on him. I watched his chest rise and fall too quickly, watched his eyes dart around the room as if searching for the version of me he used to manipulate. The forgiving one, the patient one, the woman who'd accept crumbs and call it devotion. She was gone. I felt it all the way down to my bones. When he sank onto the edge of the couch, burying his face in his hands, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt release, like unclenching a fist I didn't know I'd been making for years. He begged again, softer this time, voice breaking on every word. "Sophie, I miss us. I can fix it. I'll be better." But his promises felt weightless now, like feathers tossed in a storm, pretty, but useless. I looked at him with a steadiness that made him flinch. "I don't want you to be better," I said. "I want you gone." His tears fell harder, but I didn't move toward him. I didn't kneel, didn't soothe, didn't fold. I let the silence do the work this time, a silence he'd earned through every lie he thought I'd never catch. And slowly, painfully, he understood. When I opened the front door and stepped aside, the cool evening air swept into the house, brushing past me like a promise. Daniel stood, clutching his bags, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He walked past me quietly, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't owe him that. The door closed between us with a soft, final click, a sound that felt like the first honest thing he'd given me in months. I exhaled, long and steady, feeling the weight lift from my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the story was finally shifting back into my hands. Months later, I found myself sitting at a seaside cafe, the kind with mismatched chairs and the smell of roasted coffee drifting lazily through the air. The waves were gentle that morning, brushing the shore like they were smoothing out the rough edges of everything I'd been through. I opened my book, but my eyes kept drifting toward the horizon, soft, endless, comforting. For the first time in a long time, my body felt relaxed, not braced for the next lie, the next apology, the next disappointment. Peace wasn't loud. It was steady, warm, patient, and it felt like it finally belonged to me. My new apartment had that same energy, bright, modern, filled with plants I was surprisingly good at keeping alive. Sunlight poured through the big windows in the morning, landing on the hardwood floors in glowing patches. I decorated everything myself. The soft blue couch, the books stacked in warm little corners, the balcony garden that made the whole place smell like basil and lavender. Every detail felt like a small declaration. I'm still here. I'm still whole. I'm still mine. It was a home built from truth, not illusions. And every morning I woke up there, I remembered why leaving had been the bravest thing I'd ever done. A week ago, I mailed a thank you gift to the rideshare driver, a box of chocolates wrapped neatly with a handwritten note. Thank you for telling me the truth no one else would. It felt right to acknowledge the stranger who unknowingly nudged me toward freedom. Life has a strange way of delivering honesty, sometimes in the backseat of a car, sometimes in the quiet ache of suspicion. And as I walked along the beach after finishing my coffee, the salty breeze brushing through my hair, I felt gratitude settle over me like sunlight. Not gratitude for the past, but for the woman I'd become after surviving it.